And what's your full name?
Floy Buxton, uh, or Mrs. W.B. Buxton is a way of being telephone, but W.B. Buxton, my husband, was Dr. W.B. Buxton of Oklahoma City. So that's what I'm going into, is a bunch of stuff that I had brought down from I sold my home in Oklahoma City, and it had been broken into, and so many papers and everything of my husband that I was saving just dumped down on the floor. But you know, they also dumped down some things that I wanted real badly from looking for drugs, which I foolishly had the samples, you know, that had come to the dental office. And I guess that was the original.
Yeah.
That they wanted to do.
Ma'am, where were you born?
1898.
And when's your birthday?
June the 2nd.
And were you born in Indian Territory?
Yes.
Where?
At Alma, Oklahoma. It had just started up for, you know where Loco is?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, the doctor that delivered me was from Loco. This little, Alma had nothing but just a little store and a blacksmith shop, good blacksmith shop, and a gin. Yeah, had a gin. And it was a lovely place, really. Looking back now, I see how much lovely people lived there. Just those little log houses and half dugouts and things like that had some of the loveliest people in it. There was one, a Mrs. Macmillan. They were way from the deep south. Her name had been Applegate. And she had married this fellow that wanted to roam around. So she came up there with him, but they were separated then, their two daughters. She lived over there and had these two daughters. And they had quite a bunch of cattle that they took care of. And then they raised a patch of corn, you know, to feed their horses, and did all this man's work. And I never had a hired hand that I remember of. Most all the other families had a hired hand. And that's a peculiarity of that early day.
Yeah.
I've been wanting to tell them, you know, this Western that used to be here. Now, I was aiming when I had to have my operation, and see, I've been out about 3 years of anything. So, I want to tell about that, how this kind of as a means to have some change, you know, money along. They nearly all sold whiskey.
Now, who is this?
The people, they have their hired hand
Oh, this is Alma. Yeah.
to go around and say, hello, hello. This is what they hold their noses. Say hello. Now I was leaning against my father's knee. He was teaching me my ABCs. I'd never been to school. I was about 4 years old. But I remember this very distinctly. So he took his nose like this, said, hello, hello. no thanks, I don't use it. And this is nice, you know. I think he knew exactly who it was. It was the Nortons, hired man. He would have known his voice, so he was.
Yeah.
But now I'm doing this wrong.
No.
I'm starting wrong.
No, who was your father?
Oh, yes, that's what I should tell first. Well, my father was James Pinckney Dotson, Dotson. His father was Isaac Jefferson Dotson, and he was, now he's the one I want you to know about, especially because he fought he was in the Battle of Wilson Creek. He was in the Battle of Wilson Creek, and right in the beginning, about the first day that the South was losing a while, and then they'd come back and join and go back and forth. So he got hit by a mini ball, which went into his lungs, his chest, near his heart, lodged near his heart. But when he came to, he remembers that there's a blue uniform up above him. Somebody saying, "This one is still breathing." And so did he. That's how he was saved. He was taken into now that was an old Catholic, I think a Catholic, kind of a hospital like.
Where was this, the hospital?
This was at Springfield, Missouri, on Wilson Creek. That was just a little old creek that ran outside of there. Wilson, that's the Battle of Wilson Creek. And
Did your father talk exactly how the battle went? Did he ever describe the battle to you?
Yes. Now that was my father telling me that, but see, that was his father, and it's before he was born. My father was born. Well, after he got able to ride, he was exchanged. Now he really enjoyed himself at this place, at this, it was a hospital that they'd put up there. The North had it. And so my grandfather, Isaac Dotson, he had been born in Arkansas and had never been any other place except Texas. He'd gone there when he was a small child to McKinney, to Collin County, Texas, where he was. And so he said, that he just really, I think, really enjoyed his stay in there. And his folks were very devout, primitive Baptists, I guess it was then, the ones that shouted and so forth. Well, they were very opposed to gambling of any kind, but you know, he had learned to be a real expert at playing pitch and poker. And he had a poker face. He just didn't, all said that. Now that's my grandfather. No, yes, that's my grandfather and my father. Now my father he joined the Church of Christ, and he didn't believe at all in.
Did you know your grandfather?
Well, yes, I remember remember him pretty well. He, oh yes, and I have a good picture of him.
What did he do in the Confederate Army? What was his job?
Well, he was a volunteer with his horse and gun. Here is what is peculiar about this Blue Ridge settlement. Now that's Blue Ridge, but at that time it was just called the Ridge. And the land had been taken up mostly by, while Texas was a republic, you know, that Grandpa had. No, I don't know whether that was part of my great grandfather. That is the first one to this settlement. He was George.
Where is this Blue Ridge settlement?
It's about 12 miles from McKinney.
Okay.
See, McKinney, my mother was a McKinney, but not Colin McKinney's direct descendant. She was cousin to that. But of the McKinneys who had settled McKinney Station in Kentucky. It's right on the edge of the south edge. And it's now called just McKinney, I think, not McKinney Station. But anyway, what I'm trying to describe to you is the class of people who were these first. Now they were not killers and fighters like so many people thought they were, fighting Indians and shooting all the time. That they were not of that kind at all. They were seeking land, just wanting a piece of land to raise their families on. And they were for schools and for churches. The very first they'd build. Sometimes they built their little cabin. Most of them lived in well, no, not most of them. There was a sawmill not too far away, and they would haul. That was how one of my great aunt's stepson, who got killed by the bushwhackers.
Who settled Blue Ridge?
Well, I guess my great-great-grandfather would be counted the one that...
What was his name?
His name was George Washington Smith. Well, I'm getting you over into Texas.
No, that's okay.
And I want this Indian Territory.
George Washington Smith?
George Washington Smith. And his name is up on the book there at San Jacinto. Just George Smith. That's how it's up there.
Was he in the Battle of San Jacinto?
Yes, he was in the Battle of San Jacinto, but as a now I have trouble remembering names right when an important name. He was a scout. So there's very little that we have of that except that he drew, when he drew the pay, very small amount for about a year.
Did he ever hear any stories about the Battle of San Jacinto from your family?
Well, no. Now my father used to have it all down real well. My great-great-grandfather got... See, now I want to tell you about him.
Is this Mr. Smith, George Smith?
See, we can have two lines of this, can't we?
Yeah, sure.
In order to kind of fit them together. George Washington Smith was not Indian, but he married an Indian girl. She must have been they married in near Monticello in that same Kentucky.
Yeah. Was he from Kentucky, George Smith?
No, he is born in Tennessee. Just before it got to be a state. It was North Carolina at that time. But he was born that very year that it came in, but it's before it came in. So he was not the first white child that was born. But he was a white. And now he was he married this girl when he was 20, and he had been fighting in the War of 1812 when he was a teenager, but now he got to be 20.
What did he do in the War of 1812?
Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
And there's so many George Washington Smiths that it's been a very hard thing, but I don't know just what he was. He was not a foot soldier, he was horseback, but that's all I know. He did not shoot this English officer who was riding down there at New Orleans. He was in the Battle of New Orleans. He was sitting over there on the bank when they shot this Buckingham. No. That's English. I've been over to England, went to see his very place there in the great honor was paid to him, and he was greatly mourned because this was not in Nevada. Just some of those sharpshooters had guns that didn't go that far. They were sitting over there watching them. But Pinkingham, wasn't it? I believe it was Pinkingham. Yes, and we're very happy. All of us that descended are glad that he did not shoot Pinkingham. Now he was maneuvering and just over there with the English, across, but they could see him very plainly. And way that long distance is across the bay. Why, he saw Pinkingham fall, and we're very glad that was not held against him.
When did he go to Texas?
Well, he didn't go to Texas until 84, 1834. No, 34. 1834, while it was a republic.
That was before the republic, wasn't it?
Or before, was it?
Yeah, that.
Well, anyway, the first place he landed was in Bowie County, and we think that they came down. Tom Bigby, now he was living in Alabama, and he knew, we think that he came over and was interested in this with this Secretary of I don't know. Is that thing running? I don't know what makes me forget the name one. I'm afraid I'm getting this one up too.
Here, let me. There.
Then I could say it over or something like that. Because I'm forgetting these important things. Yes, George Washington Smith was born in Tennessee, and before it was Tennessee, just shortly the same year. And that state of Tennessee was then called North Carolina Territory. And they had married and lived. Their first child was born in Kentucky. He married this Indian girl, and she must have been, now Elizabeth, her name was Elizabeth Briggs, and the man that married them, the preacher that married them, his name was Briggs. Now we got this from a church record, and so strange since both of them were, he was only 20 and she was 16, so they were both underage according to the 21 and 18, and looks like their parents' consent should have been on that record is the church that they married, but it doesn't. It's just a church record. They were married, so I think that was her father, who I think that I had once stopped over in I'd stopped over in Nashville on my way back. I had gone to England and made me a trip to England, very, very fine trip. I loved it. But coming back, that was part of my trip, and everything was to try to look up something. I found nothing about them.
When did he move to Alabama?
Well, he must have moved about the second year after they were married. Now, their first child was born. No, their first two children. I'm wrong about my two aunts. Two daughters were born in Kentucky. Then they went to Alabama. And there he had land and slaves. And what he moved, Richard Ellis was the one that I think that he must have come up in his outfit, because Richard Ellis had gone over to Austin saying that he had a number of landowners who would like to colonize here in the new state of Texas. Now, this is before the Civil War, quite some time. And, but they were slave owners. They wanted to bring their whole outfit, quite a colony. And being that Austin was against, he did not want slaves in Texas. And so he didn't encourage them or refused, I don't know which. Now, that's Richard Ellis. But at that time, Richard Ellis was the Secretary of State, I think, over there in Alabama. Is a new state. And he was pretty well known politically, I mean every way, because he was also a preacher and a very good man, a good citizen, and he wanted good citizens, to be in this bunch. So it's just my opinion that Grandpa Smith was included in this group because he came there. His land grant was 456. Now that's my great-great-grandpa. 456. That's the number of his land grant. And his by bearers, it was 1 league and 1 bearer of land, which was 4,610 acres. But the 1,000 was it was not arable land. It was just supposed to be grazing land only. However, they seemed to have quite a bit of trouble getting enough of this and enough of that in one place to have it. So he scattered it out. He went first to Bowie County, and on the bayou there, next to the place that Will Rogers' mother went, that the oldest daughter, Mrs. Sally McSpadden, was born, was Bonham. So that was near. That is on that creek, and I don't know how many years. I guess they stayed there several years. But they were having trouble now with the Indians, that is, Quanah Parker and those who then, and my mother, my great-grandmother being Indian, they had to keep it all secret in Texas because Texas did not grant citizenship to Indians because they had their government, and it was very dangerous, you know. My goodness, they could get killed or kidnapped or whatever. But, which Quanah Parker's. Now, my father did the surveying for Quanah Parker. I'll tell you about that later. That's getting back to our Oklahoma side. But,
and he helped found Blue Ridge.
Yes. He and another man took up land there, but the other man had more land than Grandpa did. He sold his grazing land, I guess, quite a bit before that, because in one sale it said that he had sold his, just back from what it was appraised at, 2 bits an acre, which price still held in the Indian Territory in the early days. So he came there hunting first, I think, and some of the creeks and things are named that they, in the hunting, Potrack Creek, they found it. And then Bear Creek, they killed a bear on a certain creek. But mostly, and this may have been his neighbor before he was there, was I'm just not doing any good in this.
Did you hear how come he founded Blue Ridge?
Yes. His son-in-law was postmaster, I guess, first. That is a warden. And they gave the name of that. Before that, my great-grandfather over on my mother's side, the McKinney side, no, not the McKinney, the Griffith, John Fletcher Griffith was my great-grandfather. He had come just before the Civil War from Missouri, from Berry County, Missouri, and settled there. That they were having quite a bit of trouble already in there in Missouri. But He had been the mail carrier just with his saddle in his saddle pocket over from Pilot Point, which is the nearest post office to that place. But when the folks came, and also this man that had an entire land grant of over 1,000 acres. Yes, the settlers had gone in, and he bought this land that my grandfather McKinney, see, they were neighbors. He bought this land from them, from a meeting of the Indians, the largest meeting of Indians.
Yeah, that's John Bird.
John Bird, yeah. But this must have been his brother that is on that old deed and sold it to Grandpa Smith, and then Grandpa Smith sold it to the McKinneys. You see, that involves both sides of the family. On that, the first postmaster, I don't know whether it was one of the first postmasters was Pace, and that was after the Civil War. It got to be Blue Ridge after. Well, it may have been before the Civil War, but no, I think it was after. About the first postmaster that's in there named it Blue Ridge, and it's just a little settlement.
What was the original name of the area? What was the original name? Did it have a name?
The Ridge.
The Ridge?
The Ridge. And that was the Ridge settlement. You could see it for quite a distance, yet there's no mountains or anything around it. It was level land.
How come they named it Blue Ridge?
Well, I imagine this fellow must have been from the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia or someplace, because that became Texas became everybody that got mixed up in the Civil War and lost everything they had. They came even to the doctor that settled there, whose relatives later married my aunt. Yes, that Dr. Graves, he had one leg off. You know, he'd lost it in the war, and he rode horseback all the way from Virginia or someplace, or maybe Tennessee. So many who came from Tennessee. There's quite a Tennessee settlement. And they came in there, and that's how it's got its name, put in the post office.
What was your mother's name?
My mother's was Leanna Helen McKinney. She was the daughter of Sam McKinney, who was related to Colin McKinney, for whom that county was named, and also the county seat, which he was an expert on counties. He said that nobody should have to travel more than, see, that's in the Black Waxy land, and it was very difficult in bad weather to get out of there. And it's a cotton raising country, and so the distance they had to travel to the county seat made a lot of difference. But Sam Houston did not like him, and when they sent in the bid for the county to be named Collin County, he used it for Colin McKinney, who had been very prominent there. Now that is not my great-grandfather, but my great, compared with was his cousin, was William McKinney, and the father of Samuel Jefferson McKinney. Nearly all of them had Jefferson to the name.
And he said that a person shouldn't have to travel how far to the county
15
seat?
miles. He said, now it shouldn't be more than 15 miles in those bad roads, or else the people would not be able to run the country. So, yes, so Sam used to just cancel it out, wouldn't let them have a county. And so they went in and said Colin County. So that was about the next year or so, and got him by surprise, and he left them. Then they just changed it back to Colin, and then built the county seat. So the county seat is really, McKinney is really a little bit younger town than this little old Blue Ridge was, which was over there, just a settlement, and had lots of things happening. Now my great-great-grandfather was always interested in law enforcement. He always tried to be, he never ran for sheriff because he had his own business to run. He had a mill and ground corn, and also they made whiskey. And he had shipped his big mills with the big wheels, up. And that is buried now up there. I don't know how my distant cousins could just sit there and let that graders just grade that. See, they came building a road, let them bury that. They had one white that had been from France, a big white wheel, made out of stone, and a big dark wheel. And they ground corn. Well, their main thing was corn for cornbread, but they also ground flour into what they called Graham flour, which was very dark, but it made biscuits very nicely.
Where was this located?
Now this is about, it's either it's north of Dallas, about 20 miles, I guess.
Which highway covered it, do you know?
That main highway, but I forgot that.
When was the highway built? You know?
Oh, it's been built a long time, and it's very hard. I couldn't hardly drive through Dallas to save my life.
Was it at McKinney?
Well, McKinney Road went out of Dallas to McKinney, and that was what the main road.
And that's the road that covered the grinding stones?
No, that was just one of those other roads. There's quite a lot of roads. There's one that was paved. This is one that's paved.
Do you remember which
but I know where it is.
Do you remember which highway it was that covered the
No,
stones?
it's a county highway. It's a county road.
Was there in
I guess.
Collin County?
Yeah, they're in Collin County. No, I guess it wasn't a county road because it went on to Whitewright and different places. So it wasn't a county road, but it went the opposite from north and south.
How far out of McKinney was the stones? Were the stones? It's either 8 miles or 12 miles. I forgot which. Which way? Which direction?
East, north.
North of McKinney?
And east, a little bit east. Yeah, a little bit east. But mostly north. Almost. It goes right then on into Whitewright, which also was an old settlement. And that's how we came to the end, how my folks came to the Indian Territory in a covered wagon. Yeah.
Yeah, tell me, when did your folks come to Indian Territory?
It was either late '89, because the weather had already begun to get cold. They had rain all the way. No, that wasn't the time. There's another time. He wasn't. You know how he learned to be a surveyor?
How? This is your father?
Now, this little school, now is a little log school that was on my great-great-grandfather's land at Blue Ridge. I don't know. I guess they built it after he settled there, but that's just lost. I can't find any of the kinfolks that have any idea when that school was built. But you know, that school happened, see, the Civil War came about. It was there in the Civil War. That school was. Before the Civil War, it was there. And my grandfather, McKinney, was teaching. At the time he enlisted, he left the school and let my grandmother, who was real young, but she was interested in, see, girls didn't get to go to school hardly any, and she was a very smart girl. She was his pupil over in Missouri at Berry County, Cassville, which is in Berry County, that we're in Missouri. He was teaching. Now, my grandfather had gone to a Masonic school at Hot Springs, Arkansas, because that's where he was born, near Hot Springs at this little town that is now Mount Ida. the Ford people made famous. And it is honey. It's a big graveyard there, a McKinney graveyard that's I've been to. And they are, it is an interesting place. I want to go down there.
Why did your parents decide to come to Indian Territory?
Oh, yes, that's a good question. Well, my father was in the trailing cattle, the cattle drive, up to well, that place that's, see, the cattle drive ended up there
Is that in Kansas?
in Kansas. Yeah.
Dodge City?
Yeah. When he was 19 years old, or maybe he may have been, yes, 19 years old about it, he'd already graduated from the school. And let me tell you about that wonderful teacher and what influence that he had. Now, his name was Hip, Professor Hip. His name was James K. Polk Hip. And he was from Kentucky and had been in the war. But he came, he was still a young man. He hadn't married, but he sent back for his wife, and she came later, and they married. It just became a teacher there in that school at Blue Ridge. And my father and two other of the big boys didn't drop out. They went right on. And at last he graduated. And he told Grandma and Grandpa, he said, now Jimmy is a very fine student, and especially mathematics. Now this guy was really a mathematician. he taught not only now in that little log school with a dirt floor. You just can't imagine such, with a dirt floor and then just split logs for benches, to sit on. And they had church, it was also a church, had an arbor out, and they had the churches, lots of different denominations could have church there. Well, now he studied these three boys, which was John Sellers. His folks had been wiped out by the Civil War and had moved up there. And
Is this in...
the Civil War took everything they had. I guess it was around Atlanta someplace.
Where was the school that they attended?
Well, the school at Blue Ridge.
At Blue Ridge?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's the Blue Ridge School, and it's over on my grandfather's land, my great-great-grandfather's land, which just joined up to the Blue Ridge. He didn't own all of Blue Ridge, he just owned part of it, the rest of it. Oh, that, I nearly thought of that Sam that owned the biggest portion of it. That was south, but this is north of Blue Ridge, all the northern part of Blue Ridge. Nearly all of it. No.
So your father graduated from the school there?
Well, it wasn't a graduation. Those three pupils, they had gone along. Now, their method of teaching was very different from ours now. Each student covered as much ground as he wanted to, but they were in a class. They were together. That was my Uncle James Jefferson McKinney, who was my mother's oldest brother, who was born during the Civil War, while his father was in service. Very good. He became a very good teacher. I've got his picture too. He taught 32 terms of school, and he was so smart that and his memory was so remarkable, and the way that laws were passed, he could tell you which law came in about schools and everything, which year. Instead of going to college anymore, he just went and took another examination each time to get on up to a first grade certificate, because he was also running a ranch and a post office. Oh, out the way, he went west. He went out west.
Did your father ever talk about the cattle drives?
Oh, yes.
Tell me about some of the stories.
That was wonderful. They put him at the end of it, which the dust is fogged up in his face. Now, that was a chism. Now, it wasn't any kin or had no connection with this Chishholm, who was a trader. He wasn't a cattleman at all. But this was a cattleman there who lived near Blue Ridge and had some kin in Blue Ridge, I think. I think this John Sellers was kin to him. But anyway, Papa had wanted so bad to go on that cattle drive and go up north, where his father, had been and got this minie ball in his chest at the Battle of Wilson Creek, I think under Price. I think he was fighting under Price, but O'Neill was his commanding officer. Well, now I'm on my father's education, I guess. Well, this James K. Polk Hip was a most remarkable. He was a national of his father's land.
So he learned land surveying at the school and practiced
Yeah,
on.
right in that little logs. Well, oh yes, I'm leaving off something. See, Blue Ridge sprang up and had quite a few, say 30 or 40 families living in it, and had a gin and everything like that. So they moved. This had been out there in the country about a mile from town on my grandfather's land, my great-great-grandfather's land. So they decided, see, they were having that Civil War had come, and they had an awful time to keep from starving, but they did it. They just absolutely, they didn't have any salt, they just went and dug up the dirt under there where their knees had been dripping, and all of that, but they got through fine. They did all right and built up again, and the land was rich.
Yeah. Now tell me about, you say on the cattle drives, your father was put at the end of the cattle drive first?
Oh, yes. He was being young, still just in his late teens. He'd already finished the school the year before, but he got to go on this drive, so he just so glad to take any chance. And he was glad for the opportunity. Oh, he just absolutely wanted to go up north. And so that he had to be the drag, which took all the dust and had to gather up those along the way, keep them from getting. See, that's pretty well settled there. It's very hard to get up being a cattle and drive them along the road because lots of places there wasn't any fence or anything. They had just to drive along. Well, but then the boss took pity on him because he had a good gun and was a very good shot and was a hunter. Loved to hunt. So he made him to go ahead, right on ahead of the bunch and to kill him some game, have deer, turkey, or get him some fish. He can put out in Blue River, that in eastern Oklahoma, that main stream. Papa went back once and fished in it. See, they came in, I think the place that they crossed was pretty near Ardmore, pretty near south of Ardmore. At that crossing that went then to Ardmore, and then the next place it went was that there was a stop so that they could get a few eggs and stuff from the farmers, was Cogg's Valley. I think that was one of the stops. And the next, I think, was up there at the end of the railroad. Well, at last they arrived and had a wonderful time, and I guess sold their cattle pretty well.
What are some of the incidents that happened on the cattle drives?
Well, that Papa said that it was not very. Now, for instance, the Indians came down, and that was the Plains Indians, which was mostly the territory they went through was the Comanches and the Kiowas, and expected to have some beefs. And they did. The boss let them pick out. And they had no fighting. But now that was towards the end of the time. See, that was in 84. I believe. No, I don't pay attention to my dates because they just...
How long was he on the cattle drives? How many years?
Well, he just went the one trip.
Just one trip.
Just the one trip.
Mm-hmm.
And then he got married after that. They were going to send him to college. That's what the reason that the teacher, whom they thought a great deal of, he'd been teaching there for several years. He just stayed there and taught year after year, and said, now you should send Jim to college. So they were thinking about that, and of course saving up for it from their, they were raising quite a bit of cotton and making quite a bit of a revival in that neighborhood. But they had, well, that's part of my story about
what year did your parents get married?
Well, it was December the 28th. Was in late 85.
85. Okay, and when did they decide to come to Indian Territory?
Well, is when my second brother was a baby. And my Grandpa McKinney did not approve of it at all. And by the way, he was quite a bit Indian, but didn't let us out or anything himself, but now he said, get up there amongst those wild Indians and get killed and so forth and so on. And said, well, how are your children how are these boys going to get into schooling now? This grandfather had a pretty good education. He'd gone to a boys' academy in Hot Springs, Arkansas, by the Masonic, but everything, all their records and everything burned later, the entire college. So all he had were some books that were very, that's it. Now that's a peculiarity. The books he had was Pilgrim's Progress and Robinson Crusoe and The Count of Monte Cristo and, well, several, oh yes, one was Pilgrim's Progress.
Yeah. How come they decided to come to Indian Territory?
Well, it was this story of way up north that Grandpa had told you. Oh, Grandpa's eyes would just shine when he had a wonderful time in this hospital, but he wasn't entirely, see, they had probed for this, and he was not as well as he should have when the opportunity got to exchange prisoners. But he came on home with his bunch that were taken at the same time, which some of them were maybe the Harts were probably akin to Papa, his second cousins or so. I think they came home at the same time. No, I believe Papa was about the only one. I mean, Grandpa Isaac was about the only one that was in that Price's outfit. Some of the others were fighting, all of them, eventually. They went to war until there wasn't anybody left to go to school except just real small children and the girls. There wasn't hardly any. Even those young boys went away to school.
So your father came up here because of the stories that his father told him
Oh,
about the
yes,
hospital.
he was. This Indian Territory, oh, yes. Grandpa had especially, now, here's back to Grandpa. Dotson. I've got a good picture of him, too. He had made the most of his wound. I mean, being in the hospital. As soon as he's able to sit up, he went to playing cards with some of the others, and everybody got interested. And it just said even the doctor sometimes would come by and watch a little bit while they was playing cards, and being as he practiced so much, see, Texas had a very close rule against. When he came back, exchange, he had his saddle pocket full of Yankee money, and also from there were also in this hospital quite a few Southern, a whole bunch of Southern boys too, men. And so when he got back, his wound began to bleed a little. The grandmother got on her horse and really rode over to Bonnie, got that doctor for him. And he stayed at home for about a month. No, it was 2 or 3 months, I think it was, before he was entirely well enough to. But he had to sign the amnesty that he would never fight again against the United States. And so he signed it and went back then to be a dispatcher. Went back to the Indian Territory. Oh, that Indian Territory, he was crazy about it.
What part of Indian Territory
Well,
was he a
he went
dispatcher?
to at Fort Towson. Now let's see. No, Fort Towson now is a little bit west of that. He was at Fort Towson at times because he rode through there while he was dispatcher. He was from, we visited that, the historical did. And
Fort Washita?
yes, yeah, that was the place. Yes, he was in those barracks there. And he and another man would ride together to Ben Arbuckles
Yeah.
and so forth. All that way, through that Chickasaw Nation and the Choctaw, Chickasaw and Choctaw. And that was a fine experience for him.
Did he ever talk about Fort Washita, what the fort looked like?
No, he didn't say so much about the fort, but he traded with Indians. They came up, even the Plains Indians came, and he got him a beautiful black mare that he was very fond of, and he named her Anadarko because they'd come all the way with a bunch of, and traded, you know, that.
What was his job as a dispatcher? What exactly did he
Well,
do?
his mail carrier, just message.
From
mail.
Fort
Yeah.
Washita. Was this during the Civil War?
Well, I guess the war was going on, but he signed out of it. I don't know how that came about. That's the kind of a thing I don't understand.
Did he ever know Douglas Cooper? He lived at Fort Washita.
Well, I don't recall. I went there with we went one year in the buses, a whole bunch of us. Alma Fraker. But mostly the Miller, you know, the smoking room editor. That was the main one that got a piece, and really they were very fine traders.
So your grandfather didn't talk much about the fort itself?
Well, yes, he got to playing cards there too. And one again, you know, the way they had learned now to play cards, this part of Texas, I don't know whether it's true of all Texas, they were very much against gambling. So they made a law, had a law passed, that you could play only 3 times in one place. And then you had to pick up your blanket. So they kept them blanket. They'd spread the blanket out like it'd be in the field. Maybe their wife wouldn't let them play at home, you know, because those are mostly pretty religious, very religious people, and very opposed to gambling or dancing. Well, no, they had dances, but that was another generation. That was my generation. That we didn't dance at school.
Can you describe what the town of Alma looked like when you were a child?
Well, let's see. There was now after I was born, and my sister next to me, my sister Edith, next to me, we went back to Texas, and my third sister was born in Texas. But how we came to go back, my grandfather had, well, pretty nice piece of land, maybe 200 or 300 acres. Cotton, most of it was cotton, and he needed some help. And this was his only son now that had lived. One son had died with a younger than my father, Willie, had died with appendicitis. Well, so Grandpa wanted to give Papa 40 acres that where the boys had been born, that he was living on that place when the boys had been born. Well, he wanted to give him that for him to come and help him run the place, you know. They had quite a few cattle then and so forth. Well, so we went up there for a year, but by that time, see, Papa the Dotsons had a large family. They had 8 daughters, and had 3 sons. 2 of them died, and left Papa the only son. So they all let him. They very much depended. I mean, wanted him to come back and stay there on the place. And so some of the son-in-law, brother-in-laws, objected to the folks giving some of the land. It was very rich land and it was a good farming land, which mattered then a great deal. That's where you made your living. And so we only stayed a year, and then came back to Indian Territory. And this time, Grandpa McKinney didn't object because they had come and visited. Now that's my first memory of my kinfolks is when I was only 2 years old.
Yeah. What kind of house did you live in Alma?
Well, I was born in a little log cabin. See, now here's what Papa did. He leased land. See, the Indians owned all the land, but it was not divided out. See, the 5 civilized tribes owned all of this land where we came up there. It was near Ardmore, just west of Ardmore, at Alma. So, now Grandpa Dotson had learned about that while he was up there. He was very observing, and he learned all those Indian traders and everything like that. And this law, the white people were coming in there and settling, and this house that we lived in, the one that I was born in, Papa had leased that land, a piece of land, that was really several farms. You know, they were already in cultivation, and that's what I can't hardly, and that's what an old house we lived in, an old double log house that when I was a baby, they moved over there very soon, sold this first little cabin that they put up, and sold it about the first year. This when I was still a baby. They moved over to this other that had a big double log house, and no, it didn't have a double either. But it had a kitchen and a smokehouse this way built in it, and then the kitchen was separate out this way. And my first memory was in that yard, and my little brother, Elmer Dotson, who is buried over here, is still with, and this my kinfolk. Now, Elmer was telling me about God. I remember it dimly, of course, but he said it's up in the sky. He told me to look up. Said God is in, you can't see God, but he's up in the sky, See, he was very little himself, but he listened to church or Sunday school. I don't know where. Well, anyway, he had that, and I said yes. I saw him and going, and he looked like Papa. Well, Papa had just come up, and Mama had told him to get some stove wood so she could get dinner. And I know that, we were just rolling around there in that yard, and I think I just put my head back and saw him, thinking I was looking straight up. But I do remember that is a very strange thing. But the next is my kinfolks coming to see me next. That also was before my sister next to me was born. And we went to a picnic. They had nice picnics. It must have been on the 4th of July or something like that. And now this was at Alma. And I remember being there and getting lost because I was looking at some big pickles. See, there's dinner on the ground. However, my folks, because she had come to my mother, they ate at home and just went in the afternoon. But we got there kind of early in the afternoon. They still had their dinner, and those beef pickles were so beautiful and looked so red that I remember that I got lost and just screamed bloody murder. My mama was introducing her, one of my aunts, and my grandpa and grandma had come up. Grandpa McKinney was weakly. He had a leakage of the heart because he'd had fever when he was in school at this academy over, and they had to, they had to bring him home, but by that time he'd had this fever and had been laying in bed until he was very weak and so forth. So they sent a feather bed and by one of the old slaves who was good and was trusty and everything, had put him in a feather bed and went to the college. We brought him home to this little settlement out there by, it wasn't right in the settlement. And we went back one time with some of my kinfolks, and we found the very place, but my grandfather, that is my mother's grandfather.
What was the name of the settlement?
Well, I've forgotten now, but it's just outside of Mount Ida, just across the creek over there. We went, and my sister was with me, and we went and stayed all night there.
Yeah.
Too.
What kind of chores did you do as a little girl?
Well, oh yes. I washed dishes and helped my mother. But that's where I got acquainted with it. One place we went to is on Panther Branch. This is where my third sister lived. Now this is just about 1900. I remember when became 1900. I hadn't gone to school yet. Uh, yes, Mama, it is the duty to teach the girls. They never taught the boys any housework that I remember. They had a feeling against it. They thought it'd make them sissy if they got into the housework. But the girls learned to wash dishes and to sweep the house and taught them to sew a little bit. We got the first sewing machine that was in the whole neighborhood, I remember, and it was a beautiful thing. I was just thinking the other day that I could find that now. It was from Montgomery Ward and was black, shiny, and red roses on it. It was a beautiful thing. It was a pedal machine, you know, you just pedaled. And so good. See, my grandmother, Dotson, this grandmother of hers, the one that the Indian girl, and she was a very fine seamstress and sewed beautiful clothes. And they just dressed those girls, 8 daughters, up like nobody's business, because the oldest one married the son of the postmaster and that had the biggest store there at Blue Ridge. It's a big store. That is Uncle Gabe Borden, and he went over to Jefferson, and for the ships had formerly come in, and got silks and satins, and now he had beautiful material, and they just didn't look like these cotton pickers, and that would make an awfully good story. I'd want that the only work that was available that you could make any money at was picking cotton and chopping cotton. So in the spring you'd have that, and otherwise just when occasionally you might do a little housework for somebody or something, but my mother wouldn't, my father wouldn't allow the girls to ever make any money.
Do you remember Statehood Day?
Oh, yes, I was singing songs and marching down the street at Waurika.
Was we in Waurika when we joined the Union, when Oklahoma became a state?
Well, was that what that was? It's when statehood.
Yeah, 1907.
We were singing America. Yes, we marched down this main street. That is in, yeah, I remember it well.
Okay. What kind of celebrations did they have on Statehood Day?
Well, they didn't have anything except just what was at school that I know of. I believe they did shoot off a few firecrackers or something like that. No, I don't know if they did even. I don't recall if they did. See, they used to, it was a strange custom. Where were you raised?
Bartlesville.
Is that so? Well, that was in the, where they rode down from Kansas and everywhere and took up land, wasn't it? I've never been to Bartlesville.
Yeah. When did you start to school?
Well, I started pretty early. Maybe I wasn't quite 6 because they had us. Now, Papa taught school. He was teaching school when I was born. he taught about 2 or 3 terms, charging $1 per pupil.
Mhm.
See, now there were just no schools at all around in there, so they were very anxious to have a little short term during the winter. In the summer, but this was a summer school I went to, though. A man by the name of Keyes came, he and his wife came into the neighborhood. They didn't live there. And they taught us short summer school, and I went to that, although I wasn't quite 6, I don't think. No, maybe it's the summer that I was 6, but the first winter school that I went to was Papa. I went to school to him. They wanted him to, and he had quite a large, and I've got his old book of his list of pupils, but that were in there, and now I sent that to my sister. That I put it in, I framed it, and had it framed, had this framing place here, and it's down at my sister's. And also, oh yes, one thing that you might find interesting about Blue Ridge is that Papa, after he was married, he had these 2 boys. He and his brother-in-law, and Alice's husband, George McCoy, organized the Farmers Alliance, which was one that was for cattle. For especially interested in cotton raising, and so forth. And they're getting a market for their product and so forth. They signed up somewhere or other, and this was quite a cotton country. They raised, that was rich land, that is black waxy, and it was very rich, and they didn't have to put any fertilizer of any kind for 75. Anyway, my cousin that is on the farm, they were counting up how long that land that had once been great-great-grandpa's land. See, now this is 3 generations about it later, but that never had any fertilizer and was still making quite a good crop. And there's also the old graveyard there.
Yeah. Tell me about the blacksmith shop in Alma.
Yes, that blacksmith shop even made coffins. There's a man by the name of Newman. They were very nice people. Had that blacksmith shop, and I believe they had a gin also. No, it wouldn't be that, would it? Well, well, anyway, he had the blacksmith shop, and I remember the first funeral that I ever attended. A young girl, 16 years old, died of tuberculosis in a house that was on some of this land that my father was included in this leased land, which, by the way, now this is a good point. It was leased from a man, an Indian man, named Sam Jones, and he would come out just once a year to collect the rent, the lease money. Now that's the only time that we'd see him. And here's how he'd lease. He'd lease this raw land, and you'd put up your house, unless there happened to be. Papa preferred to get one that already had a house, but he would improve it. He'd put a lean-to or something on it of those log houses and everything. And I was the second wife. My husband had been divorced.
Mm-hmm. Where did your husband go to medical school?
Oh, Kansas City.
Kansas City?
Yeah. And
where was he from? Where was he born?
He was born at a little hill country in Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm. And where did you all meet?
Oh, I met him. I was a teacher, and I went up to visit my former landlady. I was teaching at Welika at the time that I met him at the home of my former landlady that I lived.
Where did she live, your former landlady?
At Welika.
Welika.
But was really a Tulsa. They were a Tulsa oil family. They'd come down there for the boom.
What year did you get married?
1920. It was during the Deep Depression. I was hoping that I could, and we went pretty soon, but the next year, we went to Mexico, hoping to open up an office, dental office. But also, that is when Villa was in his, it must have been, well, anyway, it was December the 8th. Either 26 or 28, 24, I believe. Yeah, 24.
Did you live in Welika during the oil boom?
Yes, they were having starting the oil boom then. I don't reckon that ever developed into anything much, but Comanche did. And I wish that you'd be interested in what my father, I guess it was the first time that I'd even heard of oil, like the Standard Oil of so-and-so, sent a man all the way down here from wherever that Standard Oil was to Comanche, Oklahoma, where they had a lease of land that was showing signs of needing to be developed, and that's what started that field down there. Married and yeah, that is an interesting thing.
Mm-hmm.
And
where did you go when you left Alma when you were 8 years old? Where did you move to?
Comanche, Oklahoma.
Where is Comanche?
Well, it's right due south of Duncan. Mm-hmm. It's only 10 miles. So they're just practically the same thing now.
Did you know Mr. Halliburton?
No, but he had, before he got into the oil business, he had this store, Halliburton's, and I know that's Kerr's store. I bought my first ready-made dress And I've got a picture of it. It's a pretty dress. It'd be pretty right now. I wish I had it. But that was after I was, no, it was before I was married. I was teaching school and got my first ready-made dress at Kerr's of Oklahoma City, which was a very nice store. But Halliburton's, I still have my fur coat that I got there at Halliburton's. Just before they closed, went out of business.
What year was that?
I just don't know. It must have been about 30, maybe 30 years. Anyways, when you had, the war was going on. That was later than that. And there was a 20% luxury tax on all fur coats. So that's getting in. That's not old stuff. That's,
do you remember World War I?
Oh yes, I was teaching school. I just started. I was still a teenager, but I was teaching school. I mixed up my schooling. Now my mother's people were very much for education, but because my grandfather had gone to the academy and considered himself a college, which I guess he had pretty advanced studies, but anyway, he was considered well up in law. And you know, those farmers and ranchmen down there would ride over to ask him about points of law for this, that, and the other, which was kind of a peculiar thing. So my oldest brother, who was named for Grandpa, he was Samuel Jefferson Dotson. That's what he studied, law. He always intended. And he didn't have any sons. He had 2 daughters, and one daughter is surviving now. And she had 3 grandsons. So they all studied law, and they had the firm of Deborah Dotson, Deborah, and Deborah. Now that's in San Antonio. Now that's late stuff. I'm not meaning for you to put that in. I've got the pictures all for it, but I needed to, for the last touches, you know, to kind of be interesting. If you'll come back again, I'll have this lined up, and I can write it down, jot down.
Okay.
And that'll keep me from wandering around and getting one big. But this has been a story that's been told of that early school, one that my father and mother went to, that the Farmersville, now that Farmersville was it was a little bit bigger village, but not much. The school wasn't better than theirs. But they'd come by, ride by, so horseback is the way that all of most rode to school in Texas. They, much of them did, but not my folks. They were right close there to the school, about a mile. Well, they came by and hollered before they had turned out, or whether it was the school bunch or not, but anyway, they said, "School butter," meaning they were sissies and couldn't fight. So they went out, they organized and went out and got under the bridge. They went and rode on by the school turned out. They got under a bridge, and when they came back, I just whipped them like everything. More of them, they had a bigger bunch, and they just gave them a good whipping. So that's one of their fights, and they've always been kind of...
What was the name of that school?
That was the Farmersville School.
Farmersville School.
And this was the Blue Ridge School.
Blue Ridge School.
It's one of the very early schools.
Is it still there?
Oh no, that little log schoolhouse. Well, they moved it over now. They were so poor after the Civil War. They were so poor that they moved it over, but put a puncheon floor. Do you know what a puncheon floor is?
No, ma'am.
Well, that's logs sawed into like this. And fitted them together. It must have been awfully rough. But anyway, they put a puncheon floor. I don't see that was too much better, but maybe.
What is a puncheon floor?
Well, it's split logs.
Split logs?
And just split it in there.
Yeah.
Many of that was used a great deal in the very early days, even here in Oklahoma, when they were not near enough to have split logs. But these early houses that we had, like the one that we lived in, had white floors of this white wood of cottonwood. They made fine floors, but they were wide, things like this.
About 6 inches wide?
And they had no fitting, so it made a very cold floor, unless you had your carpet, red carpet, or a rug or something.
I would like to come back.
Well, I would sure like, and let's see,
Now, his name was Buxton from Mississippi?
No, he was Dotson.
Dotson.
That's my
Dotson.
folks.
His name was Dotson from
Not my
Mississippi.
He was a lawyer practicing law at Fort Towson in the early day when there's nothing but Indians and so forth, hardly. He was practicing law, and now this is concerned about. There was a family, a man who had bought land, had quite a bit of land over. Somehow he gotten it, I don't know how, because they were not, this is Indian land, over there on Red River, about where, a little bit around where Ardmore, south of Ardmore. And these two desperados from Texas rode their horses. First they went and made a deal with the Indian agent at Talapaw. And then they rode their horses across, swam them across the Red River, and went over and shot this man by the name of Bean. He may have been an Indian, I don't know, because that is one of the Indian names. But anyway, he left and he deeded this piece of land to these slaves that he had, which the head man had been the one that owned it and had quite a family now. Something maybe up to a dozen. 10 or a dozen of them. Well, they were running this farm of his land and doing well. And those two desperados, they just came in there and just killed this head man, just shot him down and took the rest of them, brought them over here, and they were sold right here at the courthouse. right here. They were lined up there in court. So this Josephus Dotson heard about it. So he just proceeded to, well, he's going to Washington on some matters. He took it up with Washington. Finally, after about, now that he was in, see, Fort Tyler was in Choctaw Nation. It was on Choctaw business, I reckon, that he went to Washington. And he just kept at it, he stuck to it, and he got that Indian agent who was here at Tahlequah. He got him fired, and he got those Indians, those Negroes freed, and probably gave them land. I just imagine they did. But anyway, that's Josephus Dotson, and he, and the next year, they paid him $40 for the Choctaw Nation, so we got that.
And what was his name, the man?
Josephus Dotson, D-O-T-S-O-N.
He was a lawyer at
He
Fort Townsend.
gives his birthplace as Mississippi. There was a big bunch of Baptist preachers under Dotson, named Dotson, who went to Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
So I imagine that he's one of that family, and I imagine he's kin.
Yeah.
That he's a kinsman.
Yeah, thank you.
But that would be a nice thing to have in this play.
Oh, yeah.
That would be a lovely thing to put into that.